Welcome to Current Affairs. My name is Nathan Robinson. I'm the editor-in-chief of Current Affairs magazine. We are pleased to be joined today by Christopher Bruce. He is the Policy and Advocacy Director of the Georgia ACLU, and he is with us to discuss the latest developments in the case surrounding the Stop Cop City movement in Atlanta. Christopher Bruce, thank you for joining us on Current Affairs today.
Hey, happy to be here. Thank you for inviting me, and thank you for covering this important topic.
Yeah, well, it hasn't gotten nearly enough press up until now, and so I wonder if you could start perhaps for our listeners and readers by just giving us a little bit of the basic background of how and when this all originally came about. What are the origins of this whole controversy over, quote, Cop City?
I'm glad you're saying that because a lot of people who have opinions on if Cop City should go through or does not go through, a lot of them may not know the history of the area, of the legislation, and I may not even know all of it. So let me just summarize a piece of it.
Sure.
The area that's being proposed for Cop City has been used traditionally by the Atlanta Police Department. So I'll say that as a firing range and other type of exercises. Now, with it being used like that, it's kind of dilapidated the area. So there are bullets, there's waste, other places, rundown buildings of the sort. A few administrations ago, Mayor Kasim Reed was approached about building a new facility where the Atlanta Police Department can train. The Atlanta Police Department alleges that there's no training facilities for them. They get their trainings and classes at the Atlanta Metropolitan Center, and they'll go out to other counties or areas to get trained. So I think that's an important part to say. For you saying that there's no training facilities for you when there are, compared to a convenient training facility in an area that would be completely massive, is something different. So there was study after study done by the Kasim Reed administration. Then the next mayor, Mayor Bottoms, had a study done. There was legislation pushed through about how to make this happen. All that was passed before Mayor Andre Dickens had his say and his administration came to fruition. So he kind of inherited this, but he's definitely the driving force of it as well. So I think that kind of brings up to date.
Yeah.
One of the things I do want to say as well is the area, over 300 acres of forest. Atlanta's known as a city within a forest.
Right.
300 acres, and we're talking about 84 acres being drawn out of it for Cop City.
And as I understand it, the proposal is to build a very large police training facility. In fact, a number of the news reports say this would be, if it went through, the largest police training facility in the country.
You know what's funny about that? It's not funny, it's disturbing. The original proposal was actually bigger than the 84 acres.
Oh, that is disturbing.
So they actually scaled it back significantly. But as you had just pointed out, it would still be the largest training facility for the police department.
Now, is that why this is so controversial? What exactly? I mean, obviously, I assume police training facilities are built around the country quite a bit, and none has really attracted the kind of controversy. You mentioned the forest. Obviously, it has attracted a lot of eco-activists who are concerned about the demolition of forest space. But what is it that has made this, that has really excited people's passions in Atlanta about this?
Well, one, I think Atlanta and Georgia in particular, in the past 3 years, nobody has been using the name of Georgia this much since the Civil War, right? Atlanta has been at the center of politics with runoff races, with former President Donald Trump and his election deniers. So it all came into culmination to a perfect storm for something like Cop City being built. A lot of people have different views on how police should be funded. I think that's one part. Like you said, there are environmentalists who do not believe that their force should be taken down. And a lot of other people just believing in policing, and I know this is the ACLU stance, putting $90 million on a policing facility compared to putting $90 million in the community, in healthcare, in education, in transportation, and infrastructure. That's a decision that that should be taken into account and investing more into the community instead of the police.
Yeah, I mean, I assume there that all of this does occur in the background of rising tide of criticism of the police in this country, and I don't know if there have been issues in Atlanta specifically that form the between the citizens and the police that form the backdrop to some of this.
Yeah, is so if you're getting more towards, I don't know, it's actually become more of an international issue. I
Mm.
was interviewed by Le Monde in France the other day about this issue, and mostly dealing with the way that it's going about. So it's
Mhm.
one thing about protesting, it's another thing about acts of aggression, it's another thing about the police acting in a certain type of way, which brings up the 61 RICO charges, state
Yes.
terrorism, and money laundering. So different people have different views. I'm of the saying of, especially when people use the outside agitators. Dr. King was an outside agitator. John Lewis was an outside agitator. They went to Selma to march for rights and people. It doesn't matter where you come from.
Right.
Injustice anywhere is injustice everywhere. So anyone who sees injustice should stand up. It doesn't matter if you come from Oregon, or you come from New York, or you come from Georgia. Cop City's wrong.
Yeah. Well, I want to get more into the legal issues, but first, maybe you could just tell us a little bit more about the protests that have been occurring that have that have caused the state to come down so harshly.
Honestly, I don't know if, how can I put this? The state always comes down harshly.
Okay, fair enough.
This is just one situation. I remember back in 2016 when a Black man was killed and there were protests in the streets and the outcry by the police and by the state. And the bill that came up because of that, in 2017, there was a bill of SB 1, and that's also known as the domestic terrorism bill, which is what people are being charged with now in RICO cases in Cop City. And I fought that legislation in 2017 and has specifically said on the record, this legislation will be used to quell political dissent and be used against people and protesters. And fast forward 6 years later, that's exactly what's happening. So being clear, and I know we'll go into more, Georgia's just ground zero. This could be happening into a state or a city near you.
And so the protests that have been occurring, I mean, I assume there are lots of different ways in which people oppose the Cop City Training Center. There are people who go to city council meetings, and then there are people who, are literally occupying the forest and have had these clashes with construction workers and police. I mean, can you tell us a little bit about what's been going on?
Let's clear this up too. You have a First Amendment right to protest, to give grievances to the government. And like you've just summarized, people have done that at City Hall with comments. People have marched outside of City Hall and other places in the state of Georgia. They've given out flyers in other places. And like you were saying before, literally occupying the forest. I'm very sensitive about even the occupying the forest, because as I've shared with the administration, people should have the right to protest somewhere. If you do not have a sidewalk or a peaceful place for people to protest, they should be able to protest anywhere. And I don't believe that the city has provided ample opportunity for people to protest at the training facility site. Saying that you can protest at City Hall is not enough. It is not sufficient. You should be able to protest at other places. And the conversation always gets to this point. There's a difference between protesting and, throwing Molotovs or anything else within that matter. I recognize that. And again, your First Amendment right only goes so far within it. Not to get too deep into it, to say that there are already laws on the books for these type of situations for people to be charged with is one thing. To then hit them with a domestic terrorism charge is something completely different. And exposing these people to decades worth of prison time, it really flies in the face of us being able to petition our government.
Yeah, because I assume prosecutors would say, well, all we are doing is going after illegal behavior. We are not attempting to criminalize protest. But what you're saying is that the charges that have been brought, the efforts by the state have just gone so far beyond what just enforcing the text of the law would mean.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And the reason why I say that is because several reasons. let me go with the most jarring for me. There are already two district attorneys that have the jurisdiction of Cop City. One is District Attorney Fonnie Willis. She's the one who brought the indictment charges against former President Donald Trump. A lot of these acts happen in her jurisdiction, which is Atlanta, Fulton. And then there's another one. Atlanta is also shared with another neighboring county, DeKalb County. That's where the Atlanta Police Training Facility site is being built. The district attorney was currently, Sherry Boston, a Black woman, was working with the state attorney general, Chris Carr. She even said, I don't want anything to do with this. She said, we have prosecutorial differences, so the attorney general can move on by himself. The attorney general is making an unprecedented stance of going into district attorney's jurisdiction and making these charges. Land, just be simple and clear this up. There is somebody who's already been elected by the people of that jurisdiction to bring charges. They have a very competent, and nobody would say District Attorney Sherry Boston is easy on crime. No one. So to have a statewide officer who I believe most of their cases deal with workers' compensation to come down and actually charge people, 61 people on RICO charges, is ludicrous. Outside the realm of checks and balances of our government and should have never happened in the first place.
Now, one of the things that struck me as I read the RICO indictment is that, with these kinds of RICO cases that try and prove a criminal conspiracy between people, it ends up being that a lot of behavior that is used to substantiate the charges are things that seem like they should be or would be legal outside of the context of a RICO indictment. The indictment has all this stuff about, well, so-and-so bought a tarp, and that was part of the conspiracy, or so-and-so said all cops are bastards, and that was part of the conspiracy.
Right. And the list is limitless. And that's why I'm telling you, your listeners, everyone, if they can do that here, they can do it anywhere. When people are being hit with domestic terrorism charges or RICO charges for buying glue, literally buying glue, when you have a $25 or $28 charge for being reimbursed for living in the forest, you would think that your state attorney general had better things to do than to charge people with RICO. And you don't mind, I would love to go over the purpose of RICO in the state of Georgia.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to get into the real nerdy stuff. I study this stuff and it's very interesting. I want to point out that RICO was passed in the state of Georgia in 1981. And it was based off of the federal bill, the federal RICO legislation. The point of that legislation, to go after mob bosses and large organized gangs so they could be put into jail. That is the purpose. Not only is that the purpose on the federal level, here locally, when it was passed in OCGA 16-14-2, and I'm quoting this isn't my opinion, I am quoting this. It is not the intent of the General Assembly that isolated incidents of misdemeanor conduct or acts of civil disobedience be prosecuted under this chapter. It is the intent of the General Assembly, however, that this chapter apply to interrelated pattern of criminal activity motivated by the effect of which pecuniary gain or economic or physical threat or injury. It says it's not supposed to be used for civil disobedience. It literally says that in the law. So for this to be used at this time, again, is very unprecedented. RICO charges should be used against organized gangs that stretch jurisdictions, not against people who are protesting you building a public safety training center.
I suppose this is asking something of a speculative question to which it might be impossible for you to have the answer. But why? Why is the state coming down so hard on these people occupying a forest? Why are they hitting them with domestic terrorism charges and calling them racketeers and all that? What explains that?
The only thing that I can get into, because it is speculation, is politics. We know that there's a law and order messaging that's out there that navigates towards certain groups. We know that our attorney general is considering, if not fully fledged, to running for governor of the state of Georgia. So again, trying to put charges on people exercising, protesting. or just simply doing what they feel is right. For you to put up points by charging them with domestic terrorism, it's just complete, and RICO is completely wrong for your political gain. It's just wrong.
I was also struck when reading the indictment by the First Amendment implications that are raised by the fact that, within the indictment, they spend a lot of pages talking about the ideology of the activists and how they're anarchists and they believe in mutual aid and they believe in this weird thing called solidarity. Or, they spend a lot of time talking about their political ideas, and it gives the very strong impression that their political ideas are a big part of why they're being prosecuted.
And I'm glad that you read the indictment. I know a lot of people have not, because you're summarizing it correctly. This is something that you should be scared of. If you believe in the American Constitution and ideals, this indictment flies in the face of the First Amendment protections for protesters, organizers, and social justice fundraisers, turning association with a social justice movement into criminal conduct. And this is dangerous. Let me point out that, because a lot of this deals with the people who are arrested for the bail fund. The ACLU established the first large-scale bail fund over 100 years ago. And bail funds and mutual aid networks have been integral to social justice movements ever since. If you could actually get charged with RICO or domestic terrorism for bailing people out of jail, this is completely flies in the face of our system of justice altogether. And the fact that they're taking up ideology just proves my point even more, that this is for political gain and not dealing with justice.
And I suppose even though, I probably believe that, wouldn't say I have faith in the justice system, because I don't, but I think there is a strong argument to be made that the defense lawyers in this case have a very strong argument that this conduct was this is not criminal conduct under the law. But even if the people who are charged eventually, some of these most ridiculous charges are dropped, other people who might have engaged in acts of protest are now on notice that things like what you said, that are integral parts of social movements could result in them being prosecuted. And that's obviously a huge hassle, a huge risk, a huge fear.
What you're saying, and I'm glad we're emphasizing this point. Yes, this is not just a isolated event of people who care about Cop City. This is about people, period, protesting. And democracy requires dissent. Let's never forget that. Regardless of your political faction, if you believe you're a Democrat, Republican, Libertarian, or anything else, you have that view, and that political view should be yours, and you should have the right to exercise it without the government interfering in it. And that's what this indictment does. Georgia authorities are using people's beliefs and community organizing as connective tissue. Community organizing as connective tissue for sweeping criminal liability in the face of protests. So it doesn't just end at the people who are down at the forest. It doesn't end at people protesting at City Hall. It doesn't end at the bail fund. It doesn't probably even end at, like you were saying, put on notice, me, who has been speaking out against it. They could say that I was coordinating with them and I could be hit with a RICO charge. Luckily, I do have an attorney badge and everything else. And normally that would change as far as privilege goes with, like you said before, our justice system has some issues within it. But let's bring up the example of the legal observer, an attorney who is there just to legally observe, which they can do, who is now charged under RICO, under this. This is rolling back your civil rights and civil liberties. And like I said before, it doesn't matter if you're a Democrat or Republican. Anytime the government is taking away a right from you, you should fight like hell. Because once they take it away, it's hard to get it back.
Well, one of the things I've always appreciated about the ACLU in particular is that, you stick up for the most disagreeable people because you recognize that the standard that applies to you, that we apply to people who may today be our enemies, may tomorrow be applied against us. And so even if you're not an eco-anarchist, even if you don't respect the way in which these people have chosen to carry out dissent, doesn't really matter. The idea of prosecutorial power this broad is just kind of terrifying.
It really is. And I'm glad you summarized the ACLU like that. I mean, there's situations where I've been mad at the ACLU for some of the actions that they've taken. But I serve this role. I serve it proudly as one of the ways of, I believe any and everybody should have the right to exercise their First Amendment rights. And I'm proud of the ACLU and what they do in that aspect. I just want to really emphasize in my role, typically, I know I'm doing my job when I piss both parties off. And let me tell you, that's not a easy thing to do, to piss off Democrats and Republicans at the same damn time.
Yeah.
But somehow the ACLU is able to.
It's very good at it. Long track record of doing that at the ACLU. Yeah.
That gives us the respect that we do deserve from both parties to lead on the issue of First Amendment. So anytime the ACLU does stand out in front and try to champion First Amendment rights, people take notice.
To conclude here, we talked about the implications of this case broadly for protest, which is that, if this succeeds, other prosecutors will see what happened in Georgia and they will realize that it is perfectly possible to construct a theory under which any social movement is a criminal conspiracy. Let's narrow in and talk about the consequences for the particular people who are charged. I mean, what do they face? What could happen to them?
Oh, they're looking at over 20 years in prison for standing up for the rights that they have. I don't necessarily comment on people's cases, especially individual cases, because I don't want to interfere with their attorneys and the acts that they're doing. They should not have been charged in the first place. That's what I do want to emphasize. All charges should be dropped, and we're calling on the Attorney General to do that. Not only that, the repeal of domestic terrorism statute is being used to quell political dissent. It's going to be used again later on. But these individuals right here, these people who have taken up their times and their livelihoods to fight for belief of what they believe is right, again, despite your political views or backgrounds, you should not be charging these people under criminal liability of RICO or state terrorism. And that's where I'm going. I'm not saying that they shouldn't be charged with anything. If you break the law, you have consequences towards it. This law is unjust and it's unfair.
And then finally, where do things stand with Cop City right now, and what's likely to happen with that? What's the status? What's going on with this political issue locally at this point?
Oh, there's so much. But I think every day it seems like it's something new. I believe that right now the city is refusing to verify the signatures, saying that they have a court stay on it. The protesters have a different view on that. So right now they're pushing for a referendum for Atlanta residents to vote on the issue of building this public safety training facility. I, for one, believe that they should vote. I think that actually should happen. I don't think the city is going to be able to hold that back from them being able to vote on the issue. Now, dealing with petitions and everything else, you should actually encourage your city to go ahead and verify that these people are residents and everything else. Signature matches is a different story. That's a little bit more complicated. But the city does have a duty to actually verify, is this a legal petition? I'm under the belief that it is. I haven't been seen or shown anything that's not. And we could clear up this issue with a vote altogether. So we'll see how long this takes. It's back into the courts right now, which means that I stay up late at night getting phone calls about updates and everything else. So it's not over yet.
Well, we, Current Affairs, wish you at the Georgia ACLU all the best of luck in protecting the civil liberties of the people of Georgia against unchecked prosecutorial power. Christopher Bruce, the Policy and Advocacy Director of the Georgia ACLU, thank you so much for joining us on Current Affairs today.
Thank you for having me. Please continue to follow this story. It's not going to be over anytime soon.
We'll keep on it at Current Affairs, and we hope that our listeners and readers continue to pay attention too. The Current Affairs Podcast is a product of Current Affairs Magazine. If you are not subscribed to Current Affairs Magazine, visit currentaffairs.org/subscribe today and get our glorious print edition. The Current Affairs Podcast is released regularly every week on patreon.com/currentaffairs. Thanks for listening.